Welcome to the Real Money Pathway, where I share my journey from financial collapse to lasting wealth. I'm David Kim, and I'll guide you through practical strategies that transform my finances and can transform yours too. Let's build your pathway to financial freedom.
The content of this podcast is provided for general information purposes only and do not constitute financial advice. Listeners should not act upon the content or information here without first seeking appropriate advice from a financial professional.
Welcome back to Real Money Pathway. I'm David Kim, author of The Real Money Guide, the missing manual for financial recovery. In our first episode, I shared the painful journey that led to my financial collapse. From my early success at Raytheon through the failed restaurant venture, and ultimately to that moment in a bankruptcy attorney's office where I faced the full weight of my financial mistakes. Today, we're going beyond the numbers to explore something equally important but often overlooked: the psychological impact of financial trauma. Because the truth is, financial recovery isn't just about rebuilding your credit score or saving an emergency fund. It's about healing the wounds that financial collapse creates in your mind, your confidence, and your relationships. I'm still struck by how little we discuss the emotional aspects of money. We're taught about how to balance a checkbook, but not how to process the shame of financial failure. We learn about interest rates, but not about the anxiety that financial decisions can trigger, especially after experiencing a significant loss. So today, I want to have the conversation that I wish someone had with me during my darkest financial moments. We'll explore the psychological impact of financial collapse, the grief process that accompanies major loss, and how to rebuild confidence through small wins, and how money affects our most important relationships. My hope is that by sharing these deeply personal aspects of my journey, I can help you recognize that what you're feeling, whether it's shame, anxiety, or uncertainty, is a normal part of financial recovery, and more importantly, that these feelings, like your financial situation itself, can heal with time and the right approach. Financial trauma is a term that might sound dramatic, but it accurately describes what happens when money problems create lasting emotional wounds. A financial therapist I consulted during my recovery defines financial trauma as a response to financial events that overwhelm a person's coping capabilities and drastically undermines their sense of security. I experienced this firsthand after my bankruptcy, actually. For months afterward, I would experience physical symptoms when dealing with even routine financial matters. My heart would race when checking my bank balance. My hands would shake when opening mail that looked like it might be a bill. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety about money, despite having created a stable, if not modest, financial situation. One memory actually really stands out for me. 6 months after bankruptcy, I received a call from my bank flagging a potential fraud charge, a fraudulent $43 charge on my secured credit card. Even though I had the money to cover it and the bank had resolved it pretty quickly, I experienced this panic attack. I was sweating, difficulty breathing. The financial trauma had rewired my brain to think that even a minor issue was such a huge threat. That dining room table moment when I was sitting through all those bankruptcy papers, preparing for that meeting with the attorney, it became that defining moment, that defining memory that would flash through my mind whenever I made financial decisions. So for years, I could still feel that table under my palms, that stack of papers that basically represented the collapse of my financial life. This memory would intrude whenever I considered even small purchases or even creating a disproportionate fear response. This is what financial trauma does. It creates lasting associations between money decisions and intense negative emotions. It establishes neural pathways that triggers this fight or flight response to financial stimuli that normally wouldn't warrant such reaction. And perhaps most damaging, it creates that sense of shame that prevents people from seeking help. So the shame spiral around financial collapse is particularly bad. You feel ashamed of your financial mistakes, which leads you to isolate yourself, which prevents you from getting that support that you need, which often leads to continued financial problems and increases shame. It's a vicious cycle that took me years to break. I remember being invited to a friend's birthday dinner about a year after bankruptcy. I declined, of course, making an excuse about a prior commitment. But the truth was, I couldn't bear thought of being asked about like my career and looking into people's eyes like they knew what happened. This isolation only deepened my shame and delayed my recovery. If you're experiencing similar feelings, please just understand that this isn't normal. The shame, the anxiety, hypervigilance, those aren't character flaws. They're just responses to significant stress. And just like other forms of emotional injury, they can heal and they will heal with proper care and time. The first step in this healing process is just to simply acknowledge that it exists by recognizing these feelings as trauma responses rather than failings. You begin to process and separate your self worth from your financial situation. That's a critical distinction for your recovery. What surprised me most during my financial recovery was discovering that I wasn't just dealing with practical challenges. I was actually going through grief. The famous stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, mapped almost perfectly into my financial recovery journey. In the months before bankruptcy, I was deeply entrenched in denial. Despite clear mathematical impossibility, I kept believing I could somehow make the numbers work. I'd create increasingly unrealistic budget projections or convince myself that some big client contract was just around the corner. I'd ignore unopened bills while telling myself things would turn around any day now. When denial became impossible, anger took its place. I felt furious at former business partners, former customers who I believed had contributed to the restaurant's failure. I resented colleagues who still had stable careers. I even felt anger towards financial experts who hadn't warned me specifically enough about the risks I was taking. Of course, this misplaced anger did nothing to improve my situation and only delayed the real work of actual recovery. Bargaining phase was particularly painful. I remember spending countless hours running calculations, trying to find some mathematical formula that would solve unsolvable financial equations. Maybe if I sell the cars and work 7 days a week, take a side gig, or if I can negotiate with just these creditors, if I can make certain minimum payments to clear up my credit. I was desperately seeking a path that wouldn't require the complete dismantling of my financial life, just fixing it. When the reality of bankruptcy became unavoidable, that's when depression settled in. I experienced a profound sense of loss, not just of material possessions, but of my identity as a successful professional and a provider for the household. There were days where I could barely get out of bed, overwhelmed by the feeling that I had failed so completely there was no path forward. The most profound grief came when I had to tell my children. I had to tell them about our changing financial circumstances, sitting them down to explain that we'd potentially be leaving our home, changing schools, and dramatically altering our lifestyle. That was one of the hardest conversations of my life. My children, being at least in their teen years, understood to a degree and tried to keep a positive attitude, but the looks in their faces said everything to me. My son, he was concerned more for me and how I felt. Eventually, my financial therapist explained that grief and financial loss is natural. It's necessary. We don't just lose money or possessions, we lose our future plans, our social status, and sometimes even how we define ourselves. Acknowledging this grief rather than trying to suppress it becomes a crucial part of healing. Acceptance, the final stage of grief. It didn't arrive as a single moment, but gradually took hold as I began rebuilding. Acceptance wasn't about being happy with what happened, but more about acknowledging reality without the distortion of denial, anger, or bargaining. It meant seeing my situation clearly, understanding the factors that contributed to it, And then recognizing that, well, I couldn't change the past, I could create a different future. If you're experiencing grief over financial loss, please know that these feelings are very valid. Financial grief deserves the same care and attention as other forms of loss. Give yourself permission to feel these emotions rather than judging yourself for them. The only way through grief is through it, not around it. After the emotional earthquake of financial collapse, rebuilding your confidence becomes a critical but challenging process. The fear of making another mistake can be paralyzing. I found myself second guessing even small financial decisions, terrified of repeating past errors. About 8 months after bankruptcy, I needed to replace my old laptop, which was becoming pretty unreliable for the client work that I've been trying to build. What should have been a pretty straightforward purchase turned into weeks of analysis paralysis. I researched dozens of models, created all kinds of spreadsheets to compare the different models, but I just still couldn't pull the trigger. The thought of spending $700 to $1,000 on an actually necessary business expense, it filled me with fear. And I was experiencing, what psychologists call decision fatigue amplified by trauma. It's the emotional drain of financial decisions that were now exponentially higher because of my past experiences. My financial therapist suggested that I use a reframing technique, separate identity from decision. You're not your financial choice, she said. You are someone who makes financial choices, some better than others, and you can learn from all of them. The shift helped me see decisions as really data points rather than something that defined my character. The rebuilding process gained momentum through small wins that gradually restored my financial self efficacy, the belief in my ability to handle money effectively. The first of these wins actually came in the form of a secured credit card with a $300 limit. Up until then, I've been receiving rejection after rejection from every card that I had applied for. And I finally was able to get approved for a very modest $300 credit card, secured, of course. So I had to place a $300 security deposit. The day I got it, it felt great. Not because $300 of available credit would meaningfully change my financial situation, but it represented a starting point, a place that showed me a financial institution was willing to take that chance on me again. I approached this tiny credit line with careful intention, using it only for certain small purchases like gas. And of course, as soon as I used it, I paid it off immediately. Each successful payment cycle became evidence that I could handle that credit responsibly. After 6 months of on time, perfect payments, the bank actually increased my limit to $500 without additional deposit being required. That small vote of confidence for me became more to me emotionally than I actually could have imagined. Another confidence building milestone was establishing my first post bankruptcy emergency fund. I started with that goal of saving just $25 per week, an amount that felt manageable even on my uncertain consulting income. I can still remember the sense of accomplishment when that account reached $500, then $1,000. These weren't, again, life-changing amounts, but it represented a rebuilding of my financial resilience and capability. My financial therapist pointed out that these small achievements, it actually activates the brain's reward system. It creates positive association with financial management that actually counterbalance that trauma that we talked about. Each small win proves to yourself that different outcomes are possible, gradually rewriting that whole narrative of, I'm a financial failure and taking it to I'm rebuilding successfully. She recommended this technique called success stacking for those recovering from financial trauma, deliberately creating a series of achievable financial goals specifically designed to build confidence through consistent wins. The size of these victories really mattered less than the actual reliability. So for me, this is how I started. These stacked successes included that first saving of $1,000 emergency fund. The next was making 6 months of perfect payments on my secured credit card, negotiating my first consulting contract with the agencies that I was trying to get into, opening that checking account, filing the quarterly taxes for my business on time, eventually upgrading to an unsecured credit card, and then being able to build my emergency fund to just 1 month of my expenses. Now, none of these achievements would make headlines, but together they created a foundation of renewed financial confidence for me. Each one demonstrated that I can make sound financial decisions despite those past mistakes. Another powerful technique for rebuilding confidence is creating that psychological safety around money decisions. This means establishing environments and relationships where you can actually discuss those financial matters without fear of judgment. I talked about Casey before, but Casey provided that psychological safety during my early recovery. I could ask him and discuss basic financial questions without feeling shame. When I would worry about making another mistake, he would remind me, hey, your worst financial decisions you've made are already behind you. So everything from here is just learning. If you're rebuilding your financial confidence, look for those people who can provide this psychological safety, whether it's friends, family members, professional counselors. The ability to discuss money decisions openly without shame accelerates that healing process for you. Remember that financial confidence rebuilds gradually. You didn't lose trust in yourself overnight. You won't regain it overnight either. But with each responsible decision, each small goal that you achieve, you prove to yourself that you're capable of creating this different and better financial future. Financial collapse doesn't happen in isolation. It affects every relationship in your life. Conversely, relationships play a critical role in successful financial recovery. Understanding these dynamics really became an essential part of my rebuilding process. My marriage, of course, didn't survive this financial collapse. The combination of geographic separation, financial stress, a broken trust created wounds just way too deep to heal. So looking back, I saw how financial communication breakdown really contributed to our relationship's end. Way long before bankruptcy, we established pretty unhealthy patterns around money decisions. Financial conversations were, when we had them, tense. They focused immediately on the problem rather than our long term planning. As our situation deteriorated, these conversations became increasingly rare, not because there were fewer financial problems, but because discussing them were just too painful. So, discuss less, we thought would be less painful. This communication void allowed problems to grow unchecked. Without regular financial check ins, we lost shared awareness of our situation. I handled all the financial matters in isolation, partly to shield my family from stress, and also, but maybe more so, to avoid confrontation and to avoid confronting the reality myself. So, this well intentioned, as I thought, protection actually undermined our partnership by preventing collaborative problem solving. Financial secrets, even those kept with good intention, creates relationship distance. Research shows that financial transparency correlates strongly with relationship satisfaction, while financial secrecy and stress are leading predictors of divorce. When I began dating again after divorce, I was determined to establish a healthier financial communication pattern. This led to what I now consider one of the most important conversations of my life, the third date financial disclosure with now my wife, Lacey. Again, it was our third date early on over coffee. I took that time to share my entire financial history, my successes, the bankruptcy, my rebuilding. I explained where I stood financially at the moment and what my plan was for the future. My hands were literally like shaking as I spoke. I was afraid that this disclosure of financial failure would basically end what I thought could become a great relationship. Her response changed everything for me. She offered not just acceptance, but a new perspective on my financial journey, one that acknowledged the growth that actually comes from failure. From the foundation of honesty and transparency, we built a financial communication practice that continue to serve us even today, close to 10 years later. First, we established regular money discussions separate from problem solving. These money discussions happened monthly with quarterly deep dives. The key is that we would hold them consistently, not just when issues arise. This regular cadence of discussion removed emotion and made it more normal rather than exceptional. Second, we created decision making frameworks where we could agree to purchase only certain things below a threshold without consultation, a middle range that requires notification, and those maybe higher that would require mutual agreement. These boundaries provided autonomy, but also transparency between us. Third, we acknowledged also that our money personalities were a little different. Lacey's natural conservatism with finances balanced my more entrepreneurial tendencies with finances. Rather than seeing these differences as sources of conflict, we recognized how they strengthen each other and how it could work together. And finally, we practiced financial empathy, trying to understand each other's emotional reactions to these money situations. When Lacey expressed concern about a potential investment, I've learned to hear this as more of a desire for security rather than a lack of confidence, let's say, in my judgment. When I get excited about a new opportunity, she understands that this reflects my optimism rather than recklessness. So, beyond relationships, your broader support network plays a crucial role in financial recovery. During rebuilding, I learned to identify different types of support I needed. Practical support came from people who could offer tangible help. Casey provided even temporary housing. A former colleague connected me with potential clients that I could build businesses with. Emotional support came from those who could listen without judgment as I processed the psychological impact of financial collapse. These weren't necessarily people who could offer financial advice, but again, provided that safe space to express difficult emotions. Information support, of course, came from those with specific expertise. I have an accountant that understood post bankruptcy tax implications, a financial counselor that was familiar with credit rebuilding, and other friends and entrepreneurs that I knew that experienced similar financial setbacks. Building this diverse support network accelerated my recovery significantly. No single person can provide all of those types of support, and recognizing the different roles people play helped me seek the appropriate help without overburdening any one relationship. If you're navigating financial recovery while in a relationship, just remember that transparency builds trust even when the financial news isn't good. Regular, calm discussions about money creates safety that allows both partners to contribute to solutions. And perhaps most importantly, view your different money perspectives as complementary strengths rather than sources of conflict. Today's episode focused on the emotional aspects of financial recovery, and our practical takeaway reflects that emphasis. So, for the next 7 days, I invite you to document your emotional responses to financial situations using this simple framework. First, briefly note the financial situation, whether it's checking your bank balance or making a purchase, receiving a bill, or having a money conversation with someone. Second, identify that emotion that arises: anxiety, shame, excitement, relief, fear, or anything else. Don't judge these feelings, just simply acknowledge them. Third, rate the intensity of these emotions on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most intense. Fourth, note any physical sensation that you feel: racing heart, tight chest, shallow breathing, tension. Finally, briefly reflect on what might be triggering these particular emotional responses. Do they connect to past experiences, family messages about money, concerns about the future? This practice may seem simple, but it creates this powerful awareness for your emotional patterns around money. When I first did this exercise during my recovery, it was on a notepad, a journal, and I discovered that checking my bank balance, even when the balance was stable, consistently triggered an anxiety rating of 8 out of 10, with physical tension in my shoulders and shallow breathing. And I continuously recognized this pattern, and that helped me develop techniques to manage that anxiety. Deep breathing before logging into the account, consciously reminding myself that I was financially stable in the present moment, regardless of past experiences. Understanding your emotional responses to money is the first step towards healing that financial trauma. You can't change patterns you don't recognize. This simple tracking exercise brings unconscious reactions into conscious awareness, where they can actually be addressed with compassion and intention. Today, we've explored the psychological landscape of financial recovery, from understanding financial trauma to navigating that financial grief process, rebuilding confidence, and managing relationships during financial rebuilding. If there's one message I hope you take from this episode, it's that your emotional responses to financial situations are valid and they're worthy of attention. Financial recovery involves healing both your bank account and yourself and your relationships with money itself. In the next episode, Creating Your Financial Recovery Roadmap, we'll build on this psychological foundation by developing a structured approach to financial rebuilding. I'll share this systematic plan that took me from bankruptcy to financial stability to even future success. It'll include how to conduct a brutally honest assessment of your current financial reality, creating a realistic recovery timeline with meaningful milestones, building your foundation first, the critical importance of cash flow management, setting progressive financial goals that maintain motivation, tracking your progress effectively through simple systems. As you move through the coming week, I encourage you to notice not just the practical aspects of your financial situation, but the emotions that accompany your money decisions. This awareness is that beginning of the healing. I'd love to hear where you are in your financial journey. If you're comfortable sharing, please visit realmoneypathway.com and let me know what phase of recovery you're currently experiencing. Your insights might help shape future episodes and resources and help others like you. Thank you all for joining me for this deeply personal exploration of financial psychology. Healing your relationship with money is just as important as healing your financial numbers. Both are possible with time, intention, and the right support. So until next time, I'm David Kim. Remember, it's not just about money, it's about building your real money pathway to freedom. Thanks for joining me on the Real Money Pathway podcast. I'm David Kim, reminding you that financial success isn't about perfection, it's about progress. So subscribe now for more strategies, and remember, your journey to lasting wealth starts with the very next decision you make.